Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football late Friday night. Bret Bielema, this Illinois program, go on the road to Lincoln, Nebraska, and for lack of better terms, shock the college football landscape. There were not a lot of people in the national media that were picking Illinois to win this football game. I'll put my hand up and say I took Nebraska and to cover the points heading in. We jumped on late last night and kind of talked about the game, but it was much more centered around what went wrong for Nebraska, specifically in that second half. And I think the Illinois fans in the comment section were absolutely right. Like, I don't love the optics of treating Illinois like they didn't deserve to win that football game because they played some really good football. And you look at this Illinois team and say, man, we're checking a lot of boxes, like heading into Big Ten play. When you take a look at the quarterback play, Luke Altmaier has been very good for Illinois throughout the first 4 games of 2024. You look at the offensive line. This is an offensive line that in the second half outrushed Nebraska. It wasn't even close. Had over 100 yards of rushing in the second half against a Nebraska defense that in the front seven was a top 10 defense against the run heading into this game. You have legitimate 2 NFL caliber wide receivers on the outside, along with the defense that, in my mind, is night and day better. You look at Aaron Henry, what he's done with this Illinois defense going into year 2. There is such a difference in terms of how this Illinois, specifically in the secondary, is playing from 2023 to 2024. Like, this Illinois team got better at almost every single position on this football team heading into the 2024 year. Want to kind of take a deeper dive into what we saw from this Illinois team Friday night against Nebraska. Fired up to get into it. Now, before we do, and as always, to the Illinois fans, I know I bet against y'all. I apologize. I can't thank you guys enough for all the support. There's been a ton of support as we've talked about this football game throughout the first week, throughout the last couple of days, I should say. Even though I was picking Nebraska, appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start on the offensive side of the football where Barry Lunny was in his bag. Like you talk about, I think one of the bigger storylines in this game was Barry Lunny called a much better game than Tony White. You talk about 2 of the better coordinators in the country. Tony White, I think one of the best defensive coordinators that we see in all of college football. Barry Lunny won the night. I mean, everything that he schemed up, whether it was third or fourth and short, whether it was on first down, like everything that he wanted to do, whether it was the tempo of this offense in which it ran, mixing up the tempos, mixing up the play calls. Everything Barry Lunny called on Friday night worked against the Nebraska defense. This Nebraska defense, at least in my opinion, is really good. And Illinois was getting guys wide open, whether it's leaking tight ends in the flat. You have 2 really talented wide receivers on the outside. This is a hard Nebraska defense to scheme up against because of how disciplined and how well coached I think they are. Barry Lunny was in his bag. Second, Luke Altmaier. I mean, you see the numbers on the screen, 21 to 27 for 215 yards, 4 touchdowns. We all know Luke Altmaier could play. We talked about Luke Altmaier when he transferred from Ole Miss to Illinois and said, we haven't seen a ton of him, but we know going back to the high school ranks, like this kid has an arm. He can spin it. He's an athlete, can get outside the pocket. The big storyline going back to last year was the consistency wasn't always there. Like you saw some really, really bright moments from Luke, and you also saw some not so bright moments. Luke's been phenomenal throughout the first 4 games. And I think what certainly helps when you look at this Illinois offense, it's so two-dimensional. I mean, they can run the football. This offensive line, although you lost some guys to the NFL, they went to the transfer portal, I think got better on the offensive line from both the pass protection and run blocking standpoint. Like you look at this Nebraska defense, why were they so successful the first 3 weeks of the season? They were able to get pressure on the quarterback, only rushing 4. Nebraska couldn't do that, and they were kind of forced to bring some pressure if they wanted to affect Luke Altmaier in the pocket. And when you bring pressure against this Illinois team, it means you're leaving guys like Pat Bryant or a guy like Franklin out on islands. And if you're Illinois, you almost want that, because Pat Bryant has taken a massive step. We know what Zachary Franklin can do. So in the passing game, when you have the ability to be very comfortable in pass protection, when teams are just rushing 4, forcing them to bring extra guys, then getting those matchups you want on the outside, really hard offense to scheme against. Then you look at the run game. Again, a Nebraska defense that I think is really good against the run. Illinois, in the second half especially, was just road grading. So you look at all the different ways that this Illinois offense can attack an opposing defense. There's a lot of different ways. Now go to the defensive side of the football. I think where you got to start is the secondary. And I know on paper, like Dylan Raiola throws for 297 yards. Oh, the secondary didn't play all that good. The secondary played awesome. Like the throws that Dylan made, Dylan played about as good of a football game as you can see from a true freshman. Nebraska's got a real one there. This Illinois secondary last year, blown coverages, missed tackles. You could tell they missed Ryan Walters and all those draft picks that went on to the NFL. There were some growing pains. One thing that always stuck out to me about Illinois and what they did in the transfer portal was, they went out and got a guy like Terrence Brooks, but they largely kind of stuck with what they had in 2023 and said, yeah, we had some growing pains with the new defensive coordinator, with a lot of new faces in the secondary. It wasn't great in 2023. Bret Bielema kind of rocked with his guys, expected them to get better, and that's exactly what they've done. Xavier Scott, Miles Scott, two of the better players in the country in the secondary. You talk about that play against Isaiah Neyor in the end zone, taking the football away. The throws that Dylan Raiola had to make in order to move the football for Nebraska, they were high-level throws. Like, you're going to win a lot of football games, especially in the Big Ten, where you're not going to see that quarterback play every single week, where if you can make a quarterback play that good to move the football, you're going to win a lot of football games. And I think that's my biggest takeaway. The secondary massively improved in the trenches. Again, I thought Illinois won the night in the trenches, both on the offensive line and the defensive line. Got a couple of good edge rushers who are not only good getting after the passer, but also can get it done in the run defense game as well. Linebackers played well. My biggest takeaway from this Illinois team is, one, you have legitimate difference makers that are emerging, both on the offense and defensive side of the football, and those difference makers allow you to reach a relatively high ceiling. But I think my biggest takeaway is that this Illinois team is complete. Like, where is the weakness within this Illinois team? And I'll say this, I was a little skeptical about Illinois heading into this matchup because I go back to the game against Kansas and say, I thought Kansas outplayed Illinois. Illinois was able to force 4 turnovers and win that football game. The performance you saw from Nebraska or against Nebraska on Friday night, what it told me was this team is really complete. You don't really see a hole in this team, but they also have those difference makers that I think, in my opinion, allow Illinois to be very dangerous in the Big Ten. And you start looking at the landscape of the Big Ten, like Nebraska was kind of teetering on potentially being a Big Ten title contender. And I thought Illinois just came in and played a really good football game. You look at Michigan, very good opportunities there. You look at USC, we're going to find out a lot about USC. Penn State has struggled. I mean, the only team that is looking like elite in the Big Ten right now is Ohio State. If you're an Illinois fan, like, I think you're really excited about what this season could look like. I think they're going to continue to get better. Again, I think they've gotten better from the start of the season to now. Like, they played much better than they did against Kansas 2 weeks ago. Well, I didn't like the optics last night of treating Illinois like they didn't win that football game, because I think they certainly did. If you're an Illinois fan, I think you have so much to be excited about for this 2024 season. We'll wrap it up there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.